used to take a bus in a way that they did.
People not traveling must not. State hands in because we're never leaving society. So the dark of this when you're constantly remote society. It is when you look at the vast population part of it, don't care. They should care about what is true.
Yes.
And they don't understand. But on the whole, Black
Here's the
it is, right? Right.
Yes.
Yes. Tennessee was extreme. It's very simple. So have you ever worked with our cyber folks? Have you ever had anything to do with them?
In the past, very loosely. Back early in my career, I used to do some stuff with Denver Guard. The local chapter here, but I did stint down in Florida where I was working with Harris Corporation.
Yeah, I always have to ask what is so great about getting out meeting people that oftentimes will tell us stuff after something. I met with this guy,
My younger brother used to do some the DoD extract on some applications and tested staff by
yeah, and they've got a pipeline here, right here.
It's very great.
You see the names. It's a small community. People know. That's a good thing.
It is. It makes a lot easier to great time to meet.
Started.
Good morning. Please, continue to eat. That's why the food is here. But thank you. We're going to get started in the interest of everyone's time. Thank you for joining us for the Better Business Bureau's 2022 Cybersecurity Seminar on Supply Chain Risk Management. And thanks to those of you who are attending virtually. That's why the laptop is here. We're also happy that you're here. My name is Josh Planos. I'm the VP of Communications for the Better Business Bureau serving Nebraska, South Dakota, the Kansas Plains, and Southwest Iowa. I want to thank Baxter Arena, a BBB accredited business, for allowing us to host the event here in this lovely space. We're excited to hopefully hold more events here moving forward. And I can't thank Michael and Cricket, I think Cricket's down by the front door, enough for their care and support of this initiative and for providing us with a space to bring it to the public. The event was made possible by the BBB Foundation and specifically the Bureau's Community Business Programming Committee. Many of its members are here today. I won't highlight all of them, but our chair is Ann Kelleher, and she is here. And I would like to thank Ann for her leadership and support in bringing this to the public. As one might expect, given the relentless efficiency that comes standard for this industry, this committee probably has the shortest meetings of any that I've ever been a part of, but they also get everything accomplished in a short amount of time. So I thank them for bringing this to life at warp speed. We're joined today by a number of industry and business leaders, as well as a few student guests here from Metropolitan Community College. Welcome. Thanks to Gary Sparks, member of our committee, for bringing them here to be a part of this. We're thrilled to have you here. There's a lot of knowledge in this room, so if you have any questions about today's conversation, or about IT, or about cybersecurity, you've got a fantastic room of folks who are prepared to answer any and all questions that you might have, so please ask away. Every year we use Cybersecurity Awareness Month to bring programming opportunities to the communities that we serve. Cybersecurity has never been more important than it is today for businesses and consumers, and at least locally in recent weeks, there's been a lot of news surrounding companies that are being targeted by data breaches. I think a lot of topics are now probably a lot closer to home than they were in previous years. But for this year's event, we landed on the topic of supply chain risk management because it's top of mind for so many who we serve. There isn't much these days that isn't touched by the supply chain, and many enterprises and small business owners still often overlook or underestimate supply chain risks when considering things like vendor selection. Which brings us to our two speakers. Rob Romagna-Ryder is the Vice President of Information Security and Compliance at Hudl. Wade Greening is a Supervisory Intelligence Analyst at FBI Omaha. They both have very unique lenses through which to view today's topic. We thank them deeply for their time. I'm as excited as all of you to hear what they have to say today, which is why I'm getting to them as quickly as I can. Each is going to present for about 30 minutes, and then we'll conclude with a 30-minute Q&A. So if you have questions, write them down, or if you're attending virtually, type them into the comments section, and we will get as many answered as we can. So with that, we'll have Rob kick us off.
Hold this a little bit, get a little more natural. I like the pace a little bit, so it's nothing. I'm trying to make anybody nervous. It's just how to get my zone up here. So good morning, everybody. Everybody enjoying breakfast, coffee? We're here to talk about one of the most enjoyable topics possible. That is information security and compliance, and through my lens and viewpoint, how that ties into supply chain risk management, and overall, which I like to consider that a subset of third-party risk management, right? So they're very loosely connected and linked. I'll do a little bit of an intro. We'll talk about the macros on the current situation. We'll get into how we can tackle supply chain risk management through the notion of trusted versus secure. We'll dive a little bit into how zero trust plays in all this. So on that note, does everybody have their bingo cards present? Yeah, love the bingo. Great. You've heard that topic a lot. You've heard it from everybody from the White House, Joe Biden signing an executive order on how firms need to start adopting zero trust principles. We'll talk a little bit about how we can apply those to supply chain third-party risk management, and then with some closing thoughts. So about myself, I've been at Hudl now for about a year. I've been in information security and risk management for about 17 years, and I've been a very big proponent, implementer, and advisor of zero trust methodologies throughout my career, spanning security engineering, compliance, and risk management. So I'm hoping to take some of that history, some of that experience, and impart some lessons for you today. As we all know, supply chain risk management spans several areas. We'll absolutely not be able to get to all of them here today, right? Just a handful on here. All of you remember the pain we felt on deliveries being stalled throughout the pandemic, right? I mean, human loss of life, the pandemic aside, it threw what we historically considered to be the supply chain out of whack, right? Things still have not normalized from the supply and demand inconsistencies. Through an information security lens, the supply chain has also been one of the biggest and highest points of pain for a lot of businesses, right? Think of business email compromise, vendor email compromise that results in credential loss. Non-sophisticated means of incurring financial loss, downtime, and impacts to operation on businesses through zero hacking, right? So if you think back to a lot of the movies, a lot of the media, you have folks with hoodies on, right? If you ever watched the USA Network show Mr. Robot, that is what everybody has in the back of their head on the risks of supply chain management, where in reality, it's mostly somebody pointing and clicking, calling up an organization, searching your LinkedIn or Facebook profiles, gathering information, crafting messages, sending text messages, and that's how the biggest pain point of supply chain risk management is happening right now. And most of it is on those vendors in which we inherently trust to do a lot of our day-to-day business. And so the answer to this is what I've termed, or you might have heard, self-imposed scarcity, that there's always more to do than there is cycles in the day, week, month, and year. So under that lens of self-imposed scarcity, how do we prioritize time to do the most risk mitigation, the most business enablement for the shortest amount of time spent possible? And we're going to draw on lessons from the past. So does anybody recognize these papers, these books here? Show of hands. Couple. This is the Rainbow series. Why, you might ask? Because they're colored like rainbows, right? No. The DoD and the Department of Defense decades and decades ago realized that the foundational principle of supply chain systems, IT systems, is this notion that you can never secure a system, right? Systems can never be secure. Secure really means free of vulnerability. And we assume when we enter relationships with suppliers, partners, and those providing goods, services, advice, when we ask them questions through traditional vendor management and risk management, have we all noticed that they're mostly security folks? Do you have a firewall? Do you use hardening standards? Do you do vulnerability scans? How does this help me trust a vendor? It helps me check a box, I think is well intended. But the papers here, the Rainbow series, focused on the notion that we should be shifting our cycles towards establishing a higher degree of trust or trusting others less in order to move faster versus security. We need to focus on that behavior and that intent, right? When a vendor gets compromised, we receive an email that causes us to siphon out resources out of our organization because we were unfortunately social engineered through a compromised vendor. They were secure. They had an email security gateway, or they had email security protection, they had encryption, they had all the right things. They had multi-factor, right? We've seen a lot of that in the news lately, right? Everybody's heard the news. What was the most recent organization? Was it Uber, I think, a few months ago or weeks ago? Compromised because an employee hit accept so many times on the multi-factor on your device, responded to some fraudulent messages, right? So that multi-factor fatigue, you have multiple capabilities in place, but we've seen they're not good enough because we inherently trust we want to get our job done fast. So this led to this notion of Groundhog Day, which I am pulling on. We have Ron Warner in the crowd. Ron's given a talk in the past about Groundhog Day, and so we've been stuck in this, but it feels and looks a little different every day, right? Technology changes, we bolt on some more layers, we add negativity to the user experience because we think security is the right thing to solve our supply chain third-party risk management problems, when at the end of the day, we're trying to eliminate risk, but it's impossible to eliminate all risk. The business will never sign up to eliminate all risk. So what we're trying to do is create a level of risk that's acceptable to our business objectives, revenue objectives, customer satisfaction, data protection for all the laws and regulations that exist, and find a happy medium to coexist, use that self-imposed scarcity to move forward with a grand strategy and plan. So we talked a little bit again about trusted versus secure, and the reason why that's so important is because one of the quotes that has inspired me along my career from this guy here, Bruce Schneider, that if you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand the technology. We've been very quick over the last few decades in security, risk management, compliance, and audit to bolt on capabilities, right? So with third-party vendor management, supply chain risk management, you have a spectrum of organizations out there, right? Those that are starting at the beginning, or whether it's a small or medium business, Excel sheets, right? Spreadsheets. Raise your hand. We all love using a spreadsheet to do vendor management, set out questionnaires, manage our contacts. And that's fine and all, but it usually is lacking the process behind efficiently using it, right? And so you move up the chain, and then you have enterprises that have multi-million dollars or several hundreds of thousands of dollars of investments of a governance, risk, and compliance suite of tools, right? So how many of you have ever worked with a vendor and you get this nice notification in your email to click this link and go fill out a 300 line questionnaire? Anybody ever received one of those? Been part of, right? How does that add comfort that the relationship is a trusted one? You're just going through the motions, checking boxes, and answering questions. Gosh, Rob, you're painting a pretty bleak picture. What can we ever do to solve it? Well, I think, from my perspective, we've overcomplicated the whole problem, the whole issue, the whole industry. And we've forgotten this principle, the KISS design principle. I learned about it when I first went to school. Everybody here aware loosely what the KISS design principle is, right? Keep it simple. And so all that means is we need to control the controllables. In a vendor or supply chain situation, what do we control? We control the data. We control who gets access to the data. We control who we share it with. We control how the business manipulates processes and transmits that data. When we're dealing with vendors and supply chain partners, too often we're implicitly giving them trust to do whatever they want with the data, and then relying on legislation around the world that's well intended to say, hey, now you have to go back and you have to put in data protection agreements. You have to go in and make sure that they're only using the data that's authorized. You have to go back and start revoking access. And my gosh, that's a complicated and cumbersome problem. But if we start at the very beginning, then if we lean on the KISS design principle to approach vendor management, approach new processes through a zero trust lens, we can wind up in a much better, more repeatable process. We'll walk through that here in a second. So in order to really define and dive into zero trust, we got to start with that word trust. Trust is a human emotion. We all agree? Why have we ejected that into a digital ecosystem in which it has no place? Trust is designed to allow an adversary to hang out, right? That's all it does, right? Trust allows somebody to hang out in your network and not have any hacking skills in order to exploit that. It's actually, trust is the only vulnerability that's an exploit at the same time. Think about that. How scary and shocking is that? And we're connecting suppliers and vendors into systems, sometimes containing our crown jewels, without thinking twice. We get a SOC 2 report, we get an ISO certification, we get all of these artifacts that they're trying to tell us that they're secure, but in actuality, nobody's talking about how the data is being accessed, how access is being controlled, and how we're validating that what's in those packets on the internet, while it might be encrypted when it's moving from one place to the other, right? So if somebody from the outside can't look at it, how are we validating that that traffic is actually doing what it says it should be doing? That is where zero trust comes into supply chain risk management. As you can see, so I'm going to use quite a bit of artifacts. So I have my GRC and privacy director from Hudl, Lisa's here. Her and I work closely on this topic of zero trust and privacy and how the industry has gotten it wrong and how it ties into third-party risk management, supply chain management. And that's because on this pyramid here, most organizations start with identity. So raise your hand if you've heard identity is the new perimeter. We should be focusing on identity as we're moving to the cloud. When you're dealing with supply chain partners and risk management partners, focus on who that is. What we lose sight of is this whole asset and data management visibility piece. And it's not because we don't care, it's because it seems complicated. It seems difficult. We have, in a lot of times, whether it's a small, medium business or enterprise business, we just don't know where our data is. We don't have context around it. We don't know if it's structured or unstructured. We don't know the classification. And so we have this big void that causes us worry and concern. So we move up the chain to problems that are easier to solve, problems that vendors have technology to solve, versus rolling up our sleeves and maybe figuring out what we have on our systems. If we better understood what was on our systems and the requirements around the data, we can better craft policies, procedures, and programs that then we can pass along and enforce on our suppliers and vendors. that is the twist, a very simple twist in a problem that has plagued us for a very, very long time. We're going to stay on this next slide, probably for the remainder of the talk and conversation. Let me make sure it presents all right. Kind of, yeah, all right. I did not create this, but there are several zero trust working consortiums that rely on the work of John Kinderlog, Chase Cunningham, and several others of us in the industry that advocate for zero trust principles, taking this complex and cumbersome topic that many of us might today be going, okay, Rob, you still haven't tied it directly to supply chain risk management, vendor management. How do we actually do that? It comes down to this thing on the first column under define, this thing called the protect service. Every time we are working with a supplier, a vendor, no matter if it's software, right, third-party libraries or partners or open source, or you're dealing with a hardware manufacturer that's supplying you components, somebody that's supplying you crucial parts to your business, they're enabling a certain business process, correct? That business process is a tangible piece of information. We know the data, the applications, the services, the people that interact with that said business process. That business process needs to be defined, and we need to have a way to modify that in a dynamic state, right? So if people leave, people come into your organization, the data changes, we need to have a way to keep that that protect surface, that smallest combination of business processes defined, right? That's where we start. Sometimes we skip ahead. We assume we know what that business process is, but we don't truly know what it all touches. There are ways that we can work together to figure that out, right? There's solutions out there that go in and help you identify and tag and classify that information. But while we've shied away from it, it's a long process initially, right? So we're not saying that this by itself is going to give you the fastest return on effort, but what it's going to do is give you that foundation to build a scalable, repeatable program. So when we talk about defining a protect surface, we're advocating for folks when there are new business processes, when there are new initiatives, when there are changes to existing process, that is the opportune time to then try this stuff out. We're not advocating to go in and rip and replace all of your existing processes because that's very difficult, if not impossible to get funding and support for, right? So keeping these in mind as your business is growing and where they might see fit, you can then get into this design phase. Typically, we try to insource as much as possible, right? But there's certain requirements or capabilities that our businesses just aren't cut out to handle, right? So we want to only focus our core business activities on those that we're best at. In our organization, one example might be I don't have a team of penetration testers, right, or security assessors. I'm going to rely on a partner to do that. But just because I'm relying on a security partner doesn't mean I'm going to give them unfettered and uncontrolled access to absolutely everything in my environment, right? So that's where that business process that we define, enriched by who you're giving it to, thinking through this who, what, when, where, how, and why under that develop column, you take the business process with all of the attributes on how that business process should be manipulated, and that allows you to construct a policy, right? Whether it's a paper policy, whether you take that paper policy or that data policy and you configure it on your technology, right? Most of us in here, in some form or another, have a partner, use a firewall, use VPN, use some sort of combination of technology to lock down access that shouldn't occur, correct? What we're lacking is a proper way to configure and lock down those capabilities or the applications themselves or the processes themselves in a way that makes us a more trusted organization versus just feeling like we're secure. That's the only change to this paradigm that we're advocating. And again, the reason why it is such a cumbersome and complex topic to implement is because of the lack of knowledge on the data. And then monitor, right? This, I think, has been a bane to a lot of us in the security and risk management space over the last 10, 20, 30 years. There are capabilities out there. You might have heard of the term of a logging or correlation or security event management system. Does that any of those terms kind of sound vaguely familiar? Yeah, those systems are horrible. That's also led to an inefficient use of, we capture all of this logging, all of this data. We don't know what to do with it. Well, if we're defining our business process that protects service up front, You know what a normal behavior for your systems looks like. You know what to expect. You've taken the time to start codifying that on your systems to enforce that policy. All of a sudden, when you're logging or your event analysis systems or whatever you're using to alert you for deviations from the normal baseline, all of a sudden now that's more actionable information. And we haven't done much on this equation as far as going out and purchasing shiny new technology. No, we haven't said that once. But what we are saying is we have to double down on understanding what our business has in place. Us as security, risk management, compliance, audit, privacy professionals need to understand the business better than the business understands itself. You'll find oftentimes that when you dive into identifying data in an organization, your key stakeholders, your key process owners only have 3/4 of the picture, and it's up to you to identify and look at the data streams. Again, it sounds like it's scary stuff, but there's free tools that are available. There's experts in our industry that volunteer time and consultants and partners out there that can help you identify it once and put it into a dynamic working state where you have confidence you know what's going on in your network. Only after you get that into a monitor state do you then have the ability to more granularly trust your vendors and your supply chain partners. So let's walk through an example. Let's say a vendor gets compromised. The vendor sends either finance, a vendor sends procurement, or another entity different payment instructions, and your manual processes fail. They fail because you receive a notification from a trusted partner, somebody that you've done due diligence and vetting on that you feel is secure. The email coming from them is legitimate. It gets past your secure email gateway because there's no malicious tagging on it. It's just a simple request. In a normal world, normal security program posture, we're probably going to process the change, right? Especially if it's coming from a known validated account. In a zero trust enabled world, you're going to better understand and have context to what the process was to request changes to financial information. You're going to have understanding and knowledge on who and what should be involved in that entire string, and that will set off alerts and alarm bells in the whole process, and you have a lower likelihood of performing actions out of the ordinary versus relying on, okay, I trust this vendor is secure, and I'm just gonna, rely on the email coming in, right? So it's just simple little changes to the paradigm that changes how we react to the information downstream, right? There's many other examples in which we can pull from and rely on how operating through this simple process on adjusting to a zero trust strategy enables you to be more resilient to supply chain issues and third-party risk management issues. Again, I'm glad my colleague Lisa's here because she put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in helping us take zero trust through this privacy lens. Who in here is subject to also privacy legislation, whether it's local, international, or for folks that are around the country, right? Different states, different geographies are passing privacy legislation, and through the lens of a supply chain through a supply chain lens, this gets very cumbersome because you now have to process data protection addendums. You have to make sure that all of your obligations are passed down to that vendor and so forth. In this zero trust world, having that protect service identified, you now know where your data elements are. You know their sensitivity, who owns them. You now have the ability to control both in your contracts and with your technology that you already have in place, how to grant access at the right times, the right locations, and so forth. Now, you may not have all of this at once, right? There might be capabilities you have to build in over time, but that is to be expected, right? Not every application we use, not every business process we have is gonna be able to accommodate this from day one. Some might, if they're more of the modern SaaS applications, right? The application architecture is built in a certain way, or our processes are already up to speed. This gives us the blueprint to build towards and start closing those gaps. I was talking to Wade earlier, and we were talking about some of the litigious activities, that's the word I was looking for, that you've seen around the world for privacy-related concerns, right? Doing the due diligence, identifying your business processes, understanding your obligations to protect data, and being able to implement those via policy and pass those along to your supply chain partner at this level will stand up in a court of law because you have the ability to showcase that you spent the appropriate time, care, and you were not negligent, right? Versus those that, I don't know where my data was, I gave it to a supply chain partner, I was compromised, but I had security in place. Well, security and privacy, even though they're linked, they're separate disciplines. So this is how, by following one set of principles, you're also enabling several components and areas of the business. Gosh, Rob, that's a lot of information. How do I get started? That's not a one-size-fits-all for that answer in every organization. But as someone who has led and developed a Zero Trust online program at an organization, as someone who is currently leading with a fantastic team to do that in my current organization, we follow this process here, and that's starting off building what we call a center of excellence. It's just a fancy name for a close working stakeholder group, right? Where you bring in stakeholders and partners around the business. Think of it as your security council, security risk management committee, those that you're aligned with the goal in mind of striking efficiencies, making the business more nimble, efficient, supporting revenue, customer experience through the lens of rallying effort to start establishing the foundation of the Zero Trust policy. If that's not available or an option, you can get engaged with a Zero Trust partner. That doesn't require a financial outlay because there's plenty of free groups on LinkedIn. There are Zero Trust working groups, the Cloud Security Alliance, ISACA, a lot of other educational firms in town, with members like myself, Lisa, Ron, and others that participate in a lot of these events, and we're willing and available to share our knowledge, right? So get connected with your community to bring back lessons into your organization, because it's all about knowledge share and community share. And then I advocate for starting low risk versus the most critical data of your business. 2 reasons here. Starting low risk, you're generally going to be implementing new processes and procedures that are less critical to revenue and operations in your organization. You're more likely to make a mistake the first couple of times you start walking down this journey. And so the less negative impact to the business, the higher the top-down support's also going to be, right? You want to showcase a series of cascading and snowball wins across the time you're implementing this policy and process. So don't think you're going to go out and solve a tier 1 application initially, right? As you're doing a modernization effort, start low risk, learn some lessons, and you'll get into a repeatable and maintainable state. It's really the long game, right? Everybody knows the story of the tortoise and hare. The security, risk management, compliance industries, and by virtue of all of the legislation we're trying to comply with, they expect us to be the hare. Go out, buy this, implement this, we're going to give you a couple of years to do it, but by gosh, you better be 100% compliant. We all know that 100% compliance is not necessarily feasible, achievable, or allowing the business to run. We all want to be the tortoise. We should be the tortoise. Slow, steady wins in the right direction. May not seem like making a lot of progress over days, weeks, but over months, a year. Yeah, you're controlling the controllables. You're wrapping the right protections around your data. Not only are you making your business more resilient, side effect of that is going to be increasing customer confidence, your reputation, inherently complying with upcoming laws and legislation. Oh, and by the way, you're also going to make yourself more immune to some of the more sophisticated and advanced attacks, because at the end of the day, behind what you hear in the news, sophisticated advanced hacks and data being lost for millions and millions of records comes down to social engineering, access issues, and folks not updating software, right? There's a lack of multi-factor. Little pieces in this puzzle. Technology can help support, but we all have a lot of those basics in place. We're just not doing the slow, steady moves in the right place to understand the data flows. I will open up with questions. I actually was able to consolidate that down to about a half hour, so that's, call it a win. And so yeah, I have a few minutes for some questions, either now or at the end. Yes?
I know the European Union has stricter laws on privacy than the United States does. Would companies be better off in the U.S. just adhering to those stricter European Union laws if they're doing international supply purchases and just as a way of protecting themselves, even though they're not necessarily involved with that?
That's a great question. Did everybody hear the question? Okay. The intent is sound. But for those that are doing business or are subject to those in the European Union or are looking to that for guidance to help other operations, my recommendation, what I've seen work even better, is relying on some of the industry frameworks that exist that address concerns from the EU and concerns globally, right? So there are both privacy and data protection standards from NIST and IST. There's standards from the ISO organization and so forth. Adopting those frameworks gives you is close to a one-size-fits-all that you're going to be able to implement and realize in your program. So if you haven't already aligned or started gaining momentum towards a single or a consolidated control framework based on an industry standard that's freely available, that would be my recommendation. That will give you the fewest number of anomalies you have to adjust for, because even if you implement a program based on internationally recognized standards, there are some countries and some geographies that will still have little nuances, right? Whether the breach notification is sooner or later than others, what constitutes a breach and all of those little nuances. But following an industry framework that's freely available will put you actually in a better position than just complying possibly with the European Union. Yes?
What can we do in terms of contracting to ensure our vendors and suppliers are doing their due diligence? Isn't it sometimes upfront the requirement to do exactly as we're told within statement of work and contracts? So how does this relate to what you said before with regards in terms of working with the business side?
That's a great question. So I'm going to make some assumptions that we're basing this question off of right now. There may be a basic template that's governing some of the contracts, right? We try to put some of the basics in there around security requirements. We try to put basics around delivery milestones and vetting, right? So you're asking, how do we evolve upon that to take and use the lessons that we described here? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And subcontracts don't even have very much about security.
You're correct. You're correct. So there's a couple of different ways to solve this, either in parallel or waterfall style, right? So the first being a revamped or enhanced security and or privacy addendum, right? That tries to take our known obligations from the data that we're discovering and translates those into specific but not overwhelming enough language that somebody can reasonably comply with, right? So it does us no good to throw the kitchen sink in a contract that somebody's either going to just sign because they want the business and they have no way of complying with. It also does us no good to simplify it to a point where it's so vague it's not enforceable. So that's where that protect surface, identifying those business processes, you know the requirements, because requirements are tied to data. You can then work with your legal counsel to translate those into more specific and actionable requirements in a contract. If you don't have in-house counsel or in-house experts, there are firms both locally and nationally that specialize in exactly what we're talking about. The second component in that is understanding your strengths and weaknesses. Do you have staff or do you have trusted partners that know how to periodically validate that your trust with the vendor is where it should be, right? Some of it is going to be based on materiality of the contract. We're not going to be expelling effort to periodically check alignment if it's only a few $1,000s, for example, right? But if it's something that's several $100,000 or millions of dollars, you might want to ramp up. That's where your internal risk management program or some understanding of risk tolerance plays into how often you want to validate and put in milestones in those contracts that you will check for compliance. You expect certain artifacts. You give them a time period, like a right to cure, like 30 days or so, something that's found out of compliance, right? You also want to have penalties, indemnification, all of those things that legal counsel will advise you on. The third thing being, this is where I get very excited in the whole zero trust methodology, is you remember how we took our protect surface that we identified, the business process, we've codified that into our technology, and we're logging for deviations from that, right? So you should have a general enough sense over time of what the business should be doing. If you're inspecting that traffic and alerting off that traffic, you have a higher degree of likelihood of proactively notifying someone to take action, either by cutting off access or by reaching out and asking a question if that activity deviates from normal, right? So that is what the world looks like, having either months or years of these processes in place. You can very easily start with the contracting piece up front. As your zero trust methodology and strategy matures, you can get to that point where sometimes you're actually the business telling the vendor or supplier that they have an issue and you cut off access, right? That's really where you're getting to, and that's going to put you in the best, most resilient spot. Yes?
So Rob, prerequisites for a zero trust methodology. I start to think that maybe I was looking at your pyramid at the start, and was thinking maybe data classification was one of my most important ones, but I wanted to see what you thought. But before somebody started with zero trust, do they have to have a handle on certain things?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I have found by stubbing my toe, making mistakes, and what I have found that's worked is really one level below data classification and tagging, and that's asset and data management visibility. Understanding what you have and where it is. So the hardware, the software, the data contained within there, only when you know where it exists and in what state can you then move up the chain and begin, like you just mentioned, classifying it, tagging it, because we don't have to take zero trust and apply it to absolutely everything. You might have some stuff I don't care if I lose that, it's publicly available information. There's zero monetary or impact to it. You want to focus your time and attention on the things that really matter, that cause harm to the business. So that's where that data classification tagging sits on top of that data discovery or data flow mapping exercises, right? And that also gives you the perfect opportunity, if you're subject to privacy laws, to be able to tackle the records of processing activity request as well, because you know where the data is, you know where it's going, you know the sensitivity and classification level of it. Oh, if I get a request, I should be able to produce that because I know where my data is, I know where my logs are, and then kind of moving up the pyramid and chain is kind of what we've seen work. But I guarantee you, as the attacks change and its requirements change, we'll update our pyramid as well. But this is what we found is the most efficient use of order of operations to realize the benefits of zero trust, and also why the journey is a little longer than sometimes we anticipate. Yes?
So can you help me understand maybe a little bit more about denial of service attacks, because we've been disrupted, maybe where all of our data down for 24 hours, sometimes it's been even longer than that to recover. I mean, I get it that it just appears to be sort of mean-spirited, but what is there something else beyond that that's trying to be accomplished, other than just, making a business suffer a little bit?
Yeah, good question. So did everybody hear the question, the problem? Okay. In the world of denial of service, it falls into a couple of different categories, right? One, it's either targeted at a specific business, targeted at a specific vertical, and people are just out to cause specific harm. The other side of that equation is generally making a statement by taking down large swaths of the internet rights. Whether they're attacking certain protocols such as DNS, dynamic name resolution. So everybody here, when you type in google.com, it's not really google.com, it's the name that ties back to the IP address, that's google.com. Some people will attack central mechanisms of the internet, and you could be taken down as a result of relying on key areas that transmit traffic around the internet, right? So there's a couple of different things. I'm sure you've taken actions to help mitigate some of that, but as you mentioned, you can still be the victim of large denial of service attacks, no matter how hard you try, right? So is the question then, what would I recommend, or what have I seen work to help mitigate that, or was it more of just why were folks doing that?
Is there anything that they're trying to get at?
Sure.
Does it create additional vulnerabilities when you're the subject of it?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just trying to understand.
Okay. Yeah, good question. So going one level deeper, there's both the direct monetary hit that they're trying to incur on you, right? They're trying to make a statement by shutting your operations down. They disagree with what your company's doing, a stance somebody's taken. They're trying to make a point, shut down your ability to do business and make it painful, right? Those are temporarily short-lived sometimes. Sometimes it's prolonged activity. You can work with a content delivery network or some sort of DDoS mitigation service to help prevent some of those. Now, the other side of the coin is sometimes it's a distraction for folks trying to get into a networking environment, right? So sometimes there's intellectual property or there's information within an organization and adversary is after, and so an easy way to set operations teams on fire, right, into incident response mode is to launch a denial of service attack at them. Divert attention, because if they're handling that fire, it might be easier for me to go social engineer somebody else. It might be easier for me to poke around and they're not going to notice. So that could be the other avenue that I've also seen exploited with denial of service attacks, which is why it's so important to only make services externally available to the least privilege necessary, making sure that operations are resilient and that you're capturing and reacting to traffic is part of your incident response plan as well, to be able to capture some of those anomalies that attackers can sometimes try to take advantage of when they're trying to distract us. Those are usually the two paths that I've seen with the most weight behind them for denial of service attacks. Well, great. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you, Josh and BBB, for giving me the opportunity, and pass over the mic.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. Again, my name is Wade Greeny. I'm with the FBI here in Omaha. Rob, thanks for that. Rob is the technical knowledge here. I'll admit off the bat that I am not a cyber expert nor am I a supply chain analyst. So you might be wondering, what am I here for? I bring a unique perspective from the U.S. intelligence community that I want to share with you all. And so I want to take you back to September 11, 2001, because this is how I cut my teeth as an analyst with the FBI. 9/11 happened. 6 years later, here comes Wade into the FBI. And when I joined up, the 9/11 Commission had finished up their report, but we were still acting on their recommendations. We were still following up on some of the things that they said we ought to do. But as we reviewed the 9/11 Commission report, as we read through it, one of the things that strikes me and should strike all of us was that they cited a failure of imagination to be one of the key reasons that the 9/11 attacks occurred. When they looked back at what was the cultural environment that we were in at that time, the cultural environment said that if a plane was hijacked, the plans dictate from FAA and airliners, get the plane on the ground at all costs with no loss of life and allow law enforcement to then do their duty to get the hijackers' demands met or get them off the plane. In fact, the 9/11 Commission went out and interviewed pilots from that era and said, if somebody was on your plane and they had a knife to a passenger's neck, what would you do? And they said, we would open the door for them. Our adversary knew that. Our adversary took advantage of that because we failed to have the imagination to say, what if they don't want to just land the plane? What if the adversary intends to use the plane as a weapon? The 9/11 Commission found that we were not imagining a scenario other than what we had already seen. We were anticipating that our plans would default to what the recent past was, and it would just keep repeating over and over. And so if we could just follow up and follow our plan, everything would be okay. I hope you find that little bit of history a little bit interesting. It's nice to recall recent history for some of us, ancient history for others at this point, but it's nice to recall that history. And the reason I bring it up is because when I want to talk about supply chain risk management, I want to ask, what areas of supply chain defense do you neglect to add in a little imagination? And I use the word imagination, and I realize that sometimes that can be a creative topic, that we are much more focused on our linear thinking, we're much more focused on our risk management. I realize imagination can be somewhat of a strange word to use in this. You can consider it innovation if you would like, but if the political officials from the 9/11 Commission, some weighty names on that, feel comfortable using imagination as their word of choice, I think we should put some stock into what we call this. And so failure of imagination and what areas can we inject a little imagination into our plans is appropriate. What areas of our supply chain management could our adversary exploit? So see, one of my roles within the FBI, I lead a team of analysts, intelligence analysts. We look at threats, we evaluate threats, and we see how could those threats evolve and change, and what would that risk and threat be to other entities. But another one of my roles, I call it my moonlighting job, is a private sector coordinator. Now that does not mean that I am the only base that goes out from the FBI to meet with private companies like yourselves. By no means. I'm the one who tries to coordinate that within our office. So if there is a company that we don't have a good relationship with, I'll get out there and try to make that relationship. I am, by the way, happy to meet all of you and would love to meet and talk with you further if you would like that. Because that's something that the FBI is intentional about. We want to make sure that the private sector knows what the threats are, knows how these threats are developing, and that we can work together on that. But one of my favorite parts about being a private sector coordinator, besides getting out, shaking hands, and meeting people, is reading company 10K reports. Now, I'm not a lawyer, nor am I an investor, and so you wonder, why am I reading 10K reports? Because they're absolutely fascinating. The part where the company identifies their own risks is, to me, an intelligence analyst, a huge boon of information. And so as I was reading through 10K reports, I went back and started reading through some of the 10K filings from 2019. And as I was reading through those reports, you know what didn't show up? Global pandemic as a risk. And yet every single business has been significantly impacted by global pandemic. If you go back and look at the 10K reports now, you know what they all say? Global pandemic or the effects thereof. It's interesting because it took the event for us to say, oh, well, this could impact how we operate, how our supply chains are functioning. But had we used that little bit of imagination first, it wasn't a hidden world. There were people out there saying global pandemics are on the rise. We are coming up to a point at which pandemics will occur. We're at risk for strategic surprise when we fail to use our imagination about what could be. So I'm going to argue today that if your company, if your entity does not routinize imagination, to borrow a phrase from the 9/11 Commission, that you're at risk for strategic surprise. I'm not a business person. I'm in the intelligence world, but I know that no business person likes surprise. Good or bad, nobody wants to be surprised. And so what I'll offer today, what I'll talk about, is about how we incorporate imagination into our supply chain defense. Again, I'll admit to you, I'm not a cyber expert. I'm not a supply chain expert. I supervise a team of analysts who work national security matters, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, cyber, and weapons of mass destruction. What that means is that I have to build a framework for my experts, my cyber analysts, to be able to work within, to have the freedom to do the job that they need to do to anticipate surprise and get ahead of that surprise. In my role as private sector coordinator, I go around and I talk with a lot of companies. And as I've talked with multiple companies, I've really noticed, and this is an outsider perspective, again, law enforcement, intelligence, not a business person. My outsider perspective is that there's really two camps of companies out there. I see on one side, I see a camp of companies that say, we have our act together. We're fairly secure and we're confident in what we are doing, and we think that we can repel most attacks, either physical or cyber. Then there's another camp of folks, and the only thing that they're really confident in is that they're confident that there's some vulnerability they don't know yet. And they're trying to figure out what that is. Whether it's a physical vulnerability, whether it's a cyber vulnerability, they know it's out there, and they're trying everything they can to figure out what that is. You're all here, hopefully because you're in that second camp. Those are the sorts of folks that we like to deal with in the FBI because we have something to say there. We can work with those folks. The folks that come in, the companies in the first camp that say, I've got my act together. We're secure. Nobody is going to get in here and going to conduct damage against our business model. That's the place where it's hard to get in. Because that's the place where it's difficult for us to have any say and say, this is what we're seeing. We're already handling that. We're already well ahead of that. Well, okay, but if we're saying this is the threat, don't assume that the things that you have put in place already are just fine, because they, the adversary, are already looking at what you're doing and trying to figure out ways around it. No supply chain talk, especially on Cybersecurity Month, would be effective unless we mention solar winds and NotPetya, right? Solar winds and NotPetya, you know all about it. I don't have to explain to you again, I'm not the expert in the room when it comes to cyber issues. But both of them were interesting because they were intended to conduct targeted attacks against critical infrastructure and government networks. SolarWinds was focused on the United States, Petya was focused on Ukraine and apparently everywhere else in the world. Both were executed by the Russian intelligence service. So here's where I want to go with this. Let's exercise our imagination in this. We get so caught up in the what that happened. This was attacked. It was upstream. It spread to all of these different networks. It was an attack we didn't see coming. But let's exercise our imagination going forward. When SolarWinds occurred, when NotPetya occurred, put yourself in the shoes of the adversary. This wasn't just one person in Russia saying, I'm going to attack this US company today so that I can target US government networks. This was a series of calculated decisions and operations. And so when you put yourself in their shoes, you can start to understand where the decision calculus lies. There was at least one senior official somewhere in Russia who made the calculated choice, I want to target critical infrastructure in Ukraine. I want to target US government networks in the United States. That was the decision that was made. If that decision is made, it doesn't matter how secure your company is, now the marching orders have been given to go out and find a way to compromise those networks. And so then, because it is a state actor giving this direction, the state actor then orders the intelligence officers to go out and collect. Overt means, covert means that you may never see. They are collecting against your supply chain and against your company to figure out where are the points at which you are vulnerable, the points at which they can get in. These are the parts that we don't think about. Because we think, yes, the attack occurred, here's what they were wanting to target, how can we get better at preventing that? And we miss all the time that the intent behind it was coming from somebody who had all the authority to give that order out. And they put a lot of resources behind it. Because once those intelligence officers have collected all of that information, all the information necessary to execute that attack, it's given over to planners, professionals who do this for a living. They plan the attack, and only then is the cyber actor brought into this. Only then is the cyber actor told, okay, here's where we're going to attack, go find the vulnerability and execute. When we miss that perspective, when we don't allow our imagination to go to a place to say, what is really going on here beyond just the immediate attack that we're viewing, that's where we can start to have our failures. Our adversaries are investing resources in understanding our capabilities, in understanding how we defend our supply chains. And when we become over-reliant on our own capabilities, overconfident in our own security, we're not establishing that culture of imagination, let alone one of innovation. So let me give you an example. I told you my role is both an intelligence supervisor as well as private sector coordinator. So a handful of years ago, a private sector company came to us and said, we would like to work with the FBI because we're in that second camp. We're afraid that there is some vulnerability we do not yet know about. And so we would like to work with the FBI to try to identify that. We've been working on our own. We think we have a good handle. We're just not sure. So we did what we call a red hat exercise. Now, I hope your companies are already familiar with red hat or red selling. If you're not, it's something that you should get familiar with. It's really the opportunity to put yourselves in the shoes of the adversary, to think as if you are the adversary, and to allow your imagination to expand where you can target. And so what this company asked us to do is to work together with them to do a red hat exercise to see where they might be vulnerable. So we brought in a number of law enforcement and intelligence resources from the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. We brought in some of the private sector folks from that company. And what we knew going into it was we knew how each of these folks thought. We knew how private sector was thinking. We knew how our intelligence and our law enforcement partners were thinking. We were not too concerned with what the results would be because we kind of had an idea. What I thought as the lead analyst going into that was I was really interested to know what are the rabbit holes they go in. Because maybe there's a gem inside of it. And so that's what I was most excited about. But as any good exercise goes, we give them total freedom. We say, go look whatever you want. There are no constraints. We want you to explore anything, document it all, and bring it back. They did. I was excited to hear the rabbit holes, and there were some that they went down. But what was most interesting to me was that their final answer, the final product that they brought us, was exactly opposite of what I anticipated. It was exactly opposite of the experience that I knew that they all had and I would have expected them to use. They came into it and said the opposite, that dichotomy between what I, as the intelligence specialist, expected and what they, as these red hat teams brought in, became the interesting point for our analysis. Because they were able, because we gave them total freedom to use their imagination, they were able to overcome the bias that I had, the biases that even themselves had as law enforcement officers, as intelligence folks, as private sector folks. They overcame those biases and brought forth this product that was much better than what we were ever anticipating. The rabbit holes were important. We wrote products on the rabbit holes. But you know what I go out and talk to that sector about today? It's about that dichotomy. About the issue that we would have expected to see, but what actually folks came up with. That's the interesting point for us. And so I would encourage that we want to establish a culture of imagination. Establishing a culture of imagination involves incentivizing folks to think beyond the immediate. I hate, as an intelligence specialist, using the phrase outside the box because it's such a trite phrase and everyone uses it and there's really no definition to it because it's outside the box. But I would encourage incentivizing non-conforming thoughts. When people bring ideas to my office, one of my personal policies is I don't say no to their idea. I will not tell them no. I'll help them brainstorm it, put a little more meat on the bones so that they can have something they walk out with. But if they're bringing an idea in, I don't want to stifle that imagination. I want to encourage them to run with it and know full well that it could be a dead end. We have all had that in our careers. The point at which we think this is the best idea, and we run with it, and it's a dead end. That's okay. Does it cost effort, time, and money? Absolutely. Is that a cost we're willing to spend? For me, yes. I want to see where this idea goes, because maybe in that process, even if it is a dead end, there is something I can pull out and use. And so here, another example. Earlier this year, I had a team of analysts on my cyber team that brought me an idea. And the idea, I'll admit off the bat, was wild. It was, I thought, inappropriate and something that we didn't need to touch. And I thought that they were looking at the wrong area. And so I did everything I could to steer them in another direction. I never told them no. I told you, I don't tell people who come into my office, no, you can't do that. But I definitely try to push them into another direction. They were very excited about the project they were working on, and they said, no, we think we need to keep in this direction. All right, keep working on it. They finished up, they brought me the product, and I said, I don't think I can get anybody to read this. I don't think anybody is going to care about this. We let it drop, we left the product. A month later, I'm talking with my boss's boss. This is the head of the FBI for all of Iowa and Nebraska. He picked up that product. He read that product and he said, we need to put resources on this now. And so now it's our top priority for this fiscal year that we just started. It was because he read it, he said, there's something in there that I want to invest in. There's something there that I want to put resources to. And so since then, we have been working with private sector partners. We've had press conferences about this project. We have a symposium that we are planning for later this year, for next year, that we're trying to work on. And all of that is because my analysts were allowed to use their imagination to move beyond what I thought was the best way to go. I incentivized them to go forward. And there was a disincentive to me to be a naysayer, at least there is now, right? So how do we develop a culture of imagination for risk assessment that incentivizes novel thought and disincentivize the naysayers? Routinizing imagination means that we structurally have to incentivize that imagination. So I'm going to offer a few quotes. There's a book, the FBI does not recommend books, but there's a book that I like to read when it comes to unexpected times. It's called Managing the Unexpected by Carl Wick and Catherine Sutcliffe. And what they argue is that we have to create a climate where people are wary of success. They're suspicious of those quiet periods. They're concerned about when there is stability, routine, when there's challenges, lacks of challenges, when there's variety that can predispose their organization to relax vigilance or sinking to complacency. In fact, they go on to argue that one of the key barriers to vigilance is plans themselves, because plans reduce the number of things that people notice. Plans train people that your outcome, a desirable outcome, can be achieved if you just keep doing the same thing that's already worked. That's what happened in 9/11, right? The hijack, with that, the FAA and the airliners' plan said, if you are hijacked, get the plane on the ground, even if it means letting people in the cockpit. And so when that happened, we used that same plan, and 3,000 deaths later, we're still talking about it at 21 years. Now, I'm not an advocate to just toss your plans into the plat. That's not what I'm up here seeing. That's not what the FBI is saying. But what I do say is there room in your planning process for imagination? Is there room for change? Is there room to take a look at the novel ideas and incorporate those in? Are your supply chain analysts given enough freedom to explore the outside-the-box ideas? Or does that only occur after a crisis? When Russia invaded Ukraine, I can't tell you how many companies called me and said, we're concerned about our supply chain because we have a lot of entities that we receive product from in Taiwan, and we're worried that China's going to move on Taiwan now. Thankfully, China has not moved on Taiwan, but that was the wrong time to be asking the question, right? That was the wrong time because there had already been a geopolitical shift, and now the question was, well, we're worried about this happening imminently. Should we be worried? The answer is, yeah, you should have been worried 2 years ago when China said, we want Taiwan. That's the time to start saying, is there some change that we can make today that makes us less reliant on our supply chain aspect that comes from a country that we believe might be under threat? That's the imagination part. And so we encourage giving supply chain analysts enough freedom to explore those outside box ideas. We encourage that they not be penalized if they bring novel ideas that maybe end up as a dead end. And then what disincentives, whether formal or informal, are built into your processes that would suggest people should not be doing that? I love to reward my higher performers. My higher performers are typically the ones who produce the most reports. I'm sure many of you are like that. But that informally disincentivizes analysts from using their imagination because it means that you're going to get rewarded when you do more products. It's a quantity over quality piece. Do we disincentivize imagination? Is there a supervisory chain of command that is flat enough for those novel reports, those novel ideas to percolate to the top? I told you about my issue where I thought this was a terrible idea that my analysts brought to me, and while I didn't tell them no, I told them I didn't think anybody was going to read it. Thank goodness that the FBI has a flattened chain of command here, because there was only 2 levels between my analysts and the head of the FBI for 2 states. And he was able to reach down and pick up that product, read it, and then make a change based on it. Is your chain of command flat enough so that novel ideas can get acted on if the decision maker chooses to? And the last thing that I would say in terms of cultural aspects of incorporating imagination is, do you value your pessimists? I've never been accused of being an optimist, but do you value your pessimists? The people who always say it could go wrong. It might go wrong. I'm worried that we're going in the wrong direction. I'm worried that not enough resources are put on this. If we value our pessimists, at times almost more than our optimists, it does make us feel good inside, but it does make us wary of what might happen. Those pessimists have ideas that we want to incorporate into our management and into our efforts to protect supply chain. Now, I do want to address one pushback, and I alluded to it earlier. Imagination costs us money. I get that. I'm in the FBI, and while I'm not a for-profit organization, I'm very wary of the fact that every effort my folks make is a cost to the American taxpayers. It's a cost to each of you. I'm willing to take that because when I talk to my folks, the most common question I ask them is this what the American taxpayer expects of you? And if I was to query you out there about what do you expect of the FBI intelligence analyst in Omaha, I hope that your response, and I believe your response would be, we expect that they're going to get ahead of something so that they're not surprised, so that people don't die, so that money's not lost, and so that businesses and personal effects are protected. And so I see it as, if we do the imaginative analysis, even if it is a cost, even if it is a dead end, it's what the American people expect of us, and I suspect it's what your investors expect of you as well. And so when the American people demand that of me, the imaginative analysis comes out, it's my job then, as a manager, to respond with resiliency and redundancy. Resiliency in increasing, or redundancy in increasing our detection capability. For the FBI, that looks much different than what you do, but we have our detection capabilities out there. It also includes increasing our resilience, identifying what is the potential target for this threat, and getting that information out to you all who might be the potential targets, to make sure you have it so you can take the appropriate mitigating actions. Imagination, to me, is a low cost if it allows me to prioritize where research and development needs to occur and where I need to put monitoring tools. So remember at the beginning I said I had a couple perspectives as an outsider about businesses and how businesses around here do things. The second perspective, if the first one is that there's really two camps of companies, the ones who think they have everything together and the ones who are wary that there is some vulnerability they just don't yet know. The next one is that there is limited threat intelligence sharing with upstream supply chain partners. I have not met a company yet who has told me that they do not have a capability to receive threat intelligence and act on it. Everyone has that. I have not met a company yet who tells me when I ask the follow-up question of whether they share threat intelligence with their upstream supply chain that has said anything other than a flat no or a we could get better. It doesn't happen very often. And when I ask why not, the response typically is, we presume that those companies, as independent functioning companies, are already receiving threat intelligence and are already acting on it. And I'll tell you, I have not seen that to be the case. In meeting with a whole lot of different companies, I don't see that to always be the case. The answer is continued information sharing. I understand that's a costly endeavor sometimes for companies to say, yes, I'm going to share all my threat intelligence upstream, because you don't have control over where that information goes. It's also costly in the sense that you don't want to have to be the one who is controlling that information sharing. So the answer is information sharing organizations, and there are a whole lot of them out there. There's a number of information sharing organizations that give threat intelligence to the private sector. I'll highlight one. The one I'm going to highlight today is called InfraGard. Hopefully you've heard of it, hopefully you're familiar with it. If you're not, we're going to talk about it really briefly. Because InfraGard is one of those information sharing organizations. It's a nonprofit organization, chapters across the country. I understand, talking to Josh, that it's folks from Kansas, South Dakota, parts of Iowa, Nebraska that are here today. I represent chapters for Iowa and Nebraska. We have a chapter in South Dakota, we have a chapter in Kansas as well, but InfraGard is designed to foster information sharing. I put the website up there. You can see it on your screen that if you go to this website, there's two buttons. There's one that clicks apply. There's one that clicks into see the brochure. If you want to see the brochure, I have flyers up here. You're more than welcome to take one. However, if you want to apply, you click apply, and as long as you are employed in critical infrastructure, your application comes directly to me to approve or disapprove. Now, I see three distinct values for InfraGard, and I want to highlight what they are. I told you that it comes directly to me to approve or disapprove. Why is that important to you? Because the FBI vets every InfraGard member. I don't know of any other information sharing organization that vets their members through federal law enforcement. But when you talk to somebody within InfraGard, you can be assured that some intelligence analyst within the FBI has checked their criminal history. We've checked our own systems to make sure they're not referenced in our investigations or our intelligence holdings. And we've confirmed that they're a U.S. citizen who is here and is wanting to work with federal law enforcement like the FBI. These are vetted individuals. And so when they're vetted, you can go and look at the membership list and say, I'm in such and such sector, and I want to reach out to somebody else in the sector to see if they found this. You go to the membership list and say, well, there's somebody in that company, I want to reach out to them, and you can trust that that person has already been vetted by the FBI, because they're a member, and there is a secure email chain, or a secure email platform within the InfraGard members-only portal, which allows you to have communication in a secure manner, not on your own system, but through an InfraGard system. We see that as one of the critical values to InfraGard. Second, it provides a direct conduit to the FBI. Josh and I were talking ahead of time, and I said, I don't know about him, and I don't know about any of you. Growing up, I never met anyone from the FBI. I grew up in Kansas, and it wasn't rural Kansas, but I was in a city and I never met anybody from the FBI. We're trying to get past that. Because when I go out and talk to people about why did you not report that, the answer is usually one of two things. I didn't think it was important, or I didn't know who to call. I can't convince you that it's important. I'll try to tell you it is, but I can give you a face. I can give you a business card. I can give you a number that you can call night or day and get a response, and people have done that. My phone goes off after I've left work. My phone goes off on the weekend. We have this. It's odd. Is it anything? Well, I don't know, but let me run it through FBI systems, and I'll tell you whether it's something you should be concerned about. And maybe we can work together to prevent this. And one of the first questions you'll get from us when you send us that suspicious information is exactly what Rob was talking about. He mentioned having that baseline to know when something is abnormal. That's going to be one of our first questions. Why do you think this is abnormal? And we don't want to hear, oh, well, it's just an IP address from a country that we think is an adversarial country. We want to hear, oh, it's above our baseline. We watched this happen, and now it's concerning to us. So having that direct communication and direct conduit to the FBI is also important. The third distinct value, and the final one that I think, is you receive information. Remember, InfraGard at its core is an information sharing organization. So when you log on to that members only portal, you gain access to reports that are written by the FBI and our other federal government partners. Reports that you should have. If you're in the IT sector and you don't see reports from the FBI, you are missing something. You're missing seeing some of those indicators of compromise that we pass out. Information sharing is not just a static form of we put a written product out there for you to consume. It's also in a dynamic form. We host meetings. In fact, our next meeting is actually tomorrow, 2 blocks that way. That meeting, we're bringing in a speaker from the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. This is a federal center of U.S. intelligence community agencies that get together in order to secure information from foreign adversary threats. That speaker's coming in to talk about what he sees as the threat. A few months ago, we brought in someone who was a former executive in a multinational corporation that faced a state-sponsored cyber hacking attempt that took down their entire system. It was a data wiper, and it was gone. And so we brought him in to talk about what lessons learned does he have that he could offer to us. Let me tell you that one, there was quite a few aha moments during that presentation where people actually, it was one of those experiences where people actually say aha during the presentation. That's what we try to do, to make sure that there is dynamic engagement between members and between people who are presenters. So as I mentioned, tomorrow's speaker is from the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. I realize this is a little difficult to see on your screen for those of you out there, but if you go to the National Counterintelligence and Security Center website, sponsored by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, you'll see that one of their key roles is supply chain security. It's one of their key missions. They offer a few mini virtual classes out there. They make some recommendations. They have some plans, some mitigation options, and they offer contacts. This is part of their mission set. And so it's important to have access to folks like that. And we, through InfraGard, try to make that available to you. So I'll leave you with this on the quick topics here. I think imagination is the most critical component in supply chain security. If we do the same thing over and over and over again, our adversary will learn what we do and will exploit that. We have to be imaginative to the point where we can say, how are our adversaries perceiving what we do, and how's that going to change them? And the way that we can help to do that is through better information sharing. I'm partial to InfraGard because I support it directly, but there are 100 different information sharing organizations out there. Getting signed up to one is critical, and promoting your upstream and downstream supply chain entities to sign up is also critical. Now, why are these the topics I chose to talk about today? Why is information sharing and imagination the topics that I chose to focus on? The answer is this document right here. See, a couple of years ago, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence told the U.S. intelligence community, we want you to get together and we want you to think about the world in the year 2040. And we want you to say, what is the world going to be like? And what do we need to do about it now? The result was this document, Global Trends 2040. Has anyone seen it? I love presenting new information. This is free and available online. If you search Global Trends 2040, you will bring it up. It's a 200 or so page document. And it is a great resource. Because what it was it was the U.S. intelligence community using their imagination to say, where is the world going? And they came up with 5 alternative futures. One of them I'm going to talk about really quickly. And this is the reason that I chose to talk about imagination, because one of them is directly relevant to supply chain. All of them are, but one in particular, Odie and I called out. See, in this alternative future, supply chains were so significant that they chose to name the scenario separate silos. They envisioned, as one of the opportunities for the world, that we move, because of economic and military issues, to more siloed institutions. The United States, the European Union, Russia, China, a few other regional powers. And in this scenario, this alternative scenario, they say that because of all that fragmentation, supply chains would radically reorient. International trade would radically be disrupted. And probably the most interesting is that sovereign cyber enclaves would emerge. The US would have its own cyber internet structure. Russia would have its own internet structure. China would have its own. The EU would have its own, and there would be few interconnectivity between all of those sovereign cyber enclaves. Now, whether you believe that's the most likely scenario to develop or not doesn't matter. What does matter is that that scenario was issued by Odie and I as being one of 5 plausible scenarios. It's now our role, having seen that imaginative analysis occur, our role as decision makers is, could our supply chains, could our companies withstand that? Do we need to make any slight changes now, 18 years in the future, to what could happen? And maybe there is a slight change. Maybe there's something that we can do that's just a small change, doesn't cost much, but puts us in a better position for our world. That's what imagination does for us. It allows us to start doing a cost-benefit analysis as decision makers to say, is the cost enough to see a benefit potentially down the road? See, imagination is critical for us to defend supply chains. It doesn't mean we anticipate every alternative future, but it does train us to look for the non-conforming information, and it trains us to reduce the risk of surprise. So I hope today that you walk away understanding a little bit better that imagination is a key. I told you up front, I'm not a cyber expert. I'm not a supply chain expert. I'm an intelligence expert. And the way that I see the intelligence programs of various intelligence community agencies going is that we're incorporating imagination because the world is becoming more contested. The global trend for 2040 is more contested, and that requires us to think ahead in a much more broad sense, and it's not just us. It's private sector as well. And so I encourage imagination. I look forward to reading your 10K reports over the next couple of years to see where you anticipate threats are going, because we're going to be right there with you. The FBI is not a siloed agency. We want to work with private sector companies. That's why I'm here today, is because as the private sector coordinator, I want to meet with you and your companies. I want to work together. We are ready, we're willing, and we want to apply our resources so that we can get ahead as a private sector and public partnership, so we can get ahead and not have what 9/11 Commission termed a failure of imagination. So with that, we'll turn it back over to Josh and any questions that you all have.
Thanks again to our 2 fantastic speakers. We could just give a collective round of applause for them. By my watch, we have about 5 minutes, so if you have any questions at all, we still have our speakers here. I'm sure they'll be willing to answer. I guess I can kick things off with one that I saw from one of our virtual attendees. Cyber risks within supply chains have become or harmful during the pandemic because of the increasingly remote and digitized engagement between supply chain partners. This was a considerable challenge, especially for smaller companies. What general steps for a small business owner would you recommend that they take to best protect their product, their work, their company moving forward?
You're the technical expert.
Yeah, it can be, well, let's acknowledge the difficulty across the spectrum, right? Small to medium enterprises had a very difficult time, and some still do, with the remote workforces, the, let's call it the access data from anywhere, from any device. That was already a problem before the pandemic, but compounded because of all of the shifts. So what is an organization to do with limited resources, right? So I'm a very keep it simple, control the controllables. When people are accessing your environment, when people are servicing customers, there's usually a finite amount of data flows that they're working on. I usually default to you have to leverage what you know, identify what you don't know, and try to better bolster your ability to enable it anywhere. I mean, the buzzwords in the security world you'll hear is, oh, go from VPN to zero trust network access, or you need to enable this tremendously complex series of capabilities on your endpoints and inspecting all traffic and applying policies. That's great for very mature enterprises, but for a basic small to medium business owner, you just need to be focused on, are your access lists up to date, and are they reviewed for appropriateness? Do you have some of the cybersecurity basics in place, like routine patching? How are you making sure your folks out in the remote sectors of the world are having a device not immensely vulnerable to what's out there, because it's in a hostile environment, right? Anywhere I consider it to be a hostile environment. So think through that lens, that no matter where people are operating, you try to increase the resiliency, enabling, the authentication, authorization checks for your identity, your multi-factor. I mean, we're talking about very, very basic things, right? Don't click on links, revalidate emails, pick up the phone and call someone to validate if you're getting abnormal activity. These are very simple things. I know it may not be the answer they were seeking, but those are the tangible, lower cost ways that a small and medium business can take. If you're more mature, if you have more funding or resources, sure, you can find a partner to help manage some of this for you. There's managed services providers out there that'll partner with you to help add some cyber resiliency from a remote workforce, because economies of scale tend to drive the cost down for small to medium businesses that are looking to incorporate enterprise level capabilities. But don't be the victim of your own process. Look what works for your organization, what worked before the pandemic may not work now. Acknowledge that that's okay, and that it doesn't involve very costly overhauls to figure out how to get people access to the information. So,
Any questions?
What time is the Infraguard meeting tomorrow?
The Infraguard meeting tomorrow is at 4 o'clock.
Okay, that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
If you'd like to attend, RSVP to me, please.
Will do.
sounds like happy.
In addition to the Infraguard information, also, the partnership the FBI has with CISA, I get a lot of intelligence and information too.
Yeah, that, for those online who couldn't hear, the FBI's partnership with CISA is vitally important. The way that we kind of divide our partnership up is CISA is great about helping companies get ahead of the threat and stay ahead of the threat. Preparing their networks, preparing their systems, that is a great role that they offer, and we value that partnership. We're the fail-safe on the back end. When something does happen, we're the ones that are going to step in. And there is a impression, and I know it's there, about the FBI that we're going to come in and try to take over and try to take access to your network, and that's not how it works. My boss likes to use a joke of, you would expect the FBI rolls in with all our black Suburbans to take over the scene. He says, no, we would just text message today. But we don't do that. We're not coming in to ask for access to your system. We're coming to ask for, tell us what's wrong and what information we can have so we can preserve the evidence to do something. And I think also the small business question, I appreciate the fact that the question was asked, because that's a change from what we had been seeing. where it's difficult to convince a lot of small businesses that they need to invest in cybersecurity in any way, shape, or form. Even though a lot of my talk was on state-sponsored adversaries, the primary threat across Iowa and Nebraska is cyber criminals. The last time that we ran statistics, we had more cyber incidents with higher losses in Iowa and Nebraska than ever before. They're only increasing. The primary way we see those cyber incidents affected is through human error. They click on a link. Somebody responds to an email and starts that conversation. Humans, as far as we see it, are still one of the most significant vulnerabilities when it comes to security against cyber criminal organizations. And that's still who we see cyber criminal organizations targeting today. So anything you can do to harden your people to security threats is critical in the small business sector.
I think we've run over our time, but one more time if we could give a round of applause for our two fantastic speakers. Really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here today. Hopefully we can get them to stick around for maybe a few minutes if you have a question you wanted to ask them more intimate level. But we're going to have future programming opportunities sponsored by the BBB. Those will be made available on our website. It's bbb.org/Nebraska, or on our social channels. Most of our handles are at BBB Omaha. But thanks again, everybody, for being here.